The desert wind carried whispers of heartbreak as Vivian Ross clutched her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face. The stagecoach that had carried away her fiancé, Thomas, was now nothing more than a distant cloud on the horizon. He'd left her with nothing but a hastily scrawled note, and the life growing inside her a life he'd explicitly stated he wanted no part of. It was 1878 in the unforgiving New Mexico territory, and a woman alone with child might as well have been wearing a scarlet letter. Vivian had exactly $3 to her name, a small trunk of belongings, and nowhere to go. The tiny settlement of Copper Creek offered little in the way of opportunities for a woman in her condition, especially one whose reputation would soon be tarnished. "Miss, you all right there?" A deep voice startled Vivian from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Zachary Ingram stood before her, his broad shoulders and steady stance marking him as one of the most respected ranch owners in the territory. His weathered Stetson cast shadows across eyes that had seen their fair share of hardship, but there was kindness there too. "I'm quite fine, Mr. Ingram," Vivian lied, quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her gloved hand. "Just saying farewell to a friend." Zachary's gaze lingered on the disappearing stagecoach, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Thomas Blackwell, I reckon." He didn't wait for confirmation. "That man's leaving seems to have left you in a predicament." Vivian stiffened. The last thing she needed was the judgment of Copper Creek's most eligible bachelor, a man known for his unwavering principles and no-nonsense approach to life. "I assure you, my predicaments are my own to bear," she said, attempting to walk past him with what little dignity she could muster. "Miss Ross," he called after her, "night's falling and you've nowhere to go." Vivian stopped in her tracks, her shoulders slumping with the weight of his accurate assessment. How did he know? Had her circumstances already become the latest gossip in town? "I don't need your charity, Mr. Ingram." Zachary stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear his next words. "It ain't charity I'm offering, but a job. My housekeeper just left to care for her ailing mother in St. Louis. The position comes with room and board at my ranch, 5 miles outside town." Vivian turned to face him, suspicion evident in her eyes. "And why would you offer such a thing to me? We've barely exchanged more than pleasantries at church socials." "Because I know what it's like to be alone with no options," he said simply. "And contrary to what folks around here might say about me, I don't believe in leaving people to the mercy of the elements, especially not someone in your condition." Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. "How did you Thomas came to the saloon last night? Drank too much, talked too much." Zachary's expression darkened. "Not my business to spread, but also not right what he's done." Vivian felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "So the whole town knows?" "No, madam. Just me and old Pete behind the bar, and he's deaf in one ear and couldn't care less about gossip." Zachary offered a small, reassuring smile. "Your secret's safe, but it won't be for long if you stay in town." Vivian considered her options, which were painfully few. She could try to find work in town, but as her pregnancy progressed, she'd be let go for sure. She could return east to her parents, but the shame of facing them was unbearable. Or she could accept this unexpected offer from a man who, while respected, was something of a mystery to most in Copper Creek. "What exactly would my duties entail?" she asked cautiously. "Cooking, cleaning, keeping the house in order, nothing strenuous." Zachary shifted his weight. "I've got a foreman and ranch hands who handle all the hard labor. You'd have your own quarters, small but private." Vivian hesitated. "And when my condition becomes evident?" Zachary's expression remained unchanged. "That's between you and the good Lord. Not my place to judge, Miss Ross." With a deep breath, Vivian nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Ingram, though I must warn you my culinary skills are limited at best." A hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Can't be worse than what me and the boys have been surviving on." The journey to the Ingram Ranch was undertaken in relative silence, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves against dirt providing a steady backdrop to Vivian's tumultuous thoughts. The ranch itself appeared on the horizon just as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of purple and orange, a sprawling main house flanked by a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. It's lovely, Vivian said, genuinely impressed by the well-maintained property. Been in the family for 2 generations, Zachary replied, a note of pride in his voice. My father built it from nothing. As they pulled up to the house, several ranch hands paused in their evening chores to observe the newcomer with undisguised curiosity. Zachary helped Vivian down from the wagon with a gentle hand, then retrieved her trunk. Evening, boss, called a grizzled older man, approaching from the direction of the barn. This must be the new housekeeper you mentioned. Miss Vivian Ross, this is Ernest Miller, my foreman for going on 15 years now, Zachary introduced. Miss Ross will be taking over housekeeping duties starting tomorrow. Ernest tipped his hat respectfully. Madam, pleasure to have you. Place could surely use a woman's touch. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll do my best, Vivian replied, grateful for the simple acceptance in the man's greeting. Zachary led her into the house, which was spacious but sparsely furnished, clearly the domain of a man with little concern for comfort beyond necessity. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, though a stack of unwashed dishes indicated the recent absence of household help. Your quarters are through here, he said, leading her down a short hallway to a modest but clean room with a single bed, dresser, and small window overlooking a garden that had seen better days. Bathrooms across the hall. You'll have privacy. I stay in the master bedroom upstairs, and the hands have the bunkhouse. Vivian set her handbag on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Just this morning, she'd been planning a life with Thomas. Now she was alone, pregnant, and dependent on the kindness of a virtual stranger. I'll leave you to settle in, Zachary said, placing her trunk at the foot of the bed. Supper's usually at 7, but don't worry about cooking tonight. Ernie's wife sent over a stew. Mr. Ingram, Vivian called as he turned to leave. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. Zachary paused in the doorway. Get some rest, Miss Ross. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next. After he left, Vivian sat heavily on the bed, one hand protectively covering her abdomen. It's just us now, little one, she whispered, but we'll find our way, somehow. The next few weeks settled into a routine that brought Vivian unexpected comfort. She rose early to prepare breakfast for Zachary and the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the previously neglected house, and her afternoons baking or tending to the small garden she'd begun to resurrect. Her cooking improved rapidly out of necessity, and the grateful reactions from the perpetually hungry cowboys boosted her confidence. Zachary himself remained something of an enigma, polite but reserved, absent for much of the day as he tended to ranch business, and typically retiring to his study after dinner with account books or correspondence. Still, Vivian occasionally caught him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her heart quicken in a way she told herself was merely anxiety. As her 3rd month at the ranch began, Vivian could no longer hide the gentle swell of her belly beneath her aprons. She'd taken to wearing looser dresses, but the evidence of her condition was becoming unmistakable. One evening, as she served coffee in the sitting room where Zachary was reviewing cattle prices, he finally broached the subject. Miss Ross, he began, setting aside his papers. I've been meaning to ask about your plans. Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she poured. Plans, Mr. Ingram, for when the baby comes. His voice was gentle but direct. Have you given thought to what you'll do? The question hung in the air between them. Vivian had indeed thought of little else, but had reached no satisfactory conclusion. I had hoped to continue working here if that's agreeable to you, she said carefully. Though I understand if having a woman of questionable virtue under your roof is problematic, Zachary frowned. Your virtue isn't in question, at least not by me. It's your well-being and the child's that concerns me. Vivian set the coffee pot down before her shaking hands could betray her further. I'll manage, Mr. Ingram, I always have. And the father? Zachary asked, his tone neutral. Will he provide support? Thomas made his feelings quite clear, Vivian said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. He never wanted this baby, said it would ruin everything he'd worked for. She fought back tears. He's gone east to take a banking position that wouldn't have welcomed a ready-made family. Zachary was silent for a long moment, his expression hardening. Finally, he stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "There's talk in town," he said quietly. "Nothing specific yet, but questions about your situation. It's only a matter of time before someone makes the connection." Fear coiled in Vivian's chest. "Will you ask me to leave?" Zachary turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze startled her. "No," he said firmly. "But I have a proposition that might solve both our problems." "Both our problems?" Vivian echoed, confused. "I need a wife, Miss Ross." The statement was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss the weather. "This ranch needs a woman's permanent presence, and I need an heir." Vivian stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Mr. Ingram, if this is some kind of joke—" "I don't joke about such matters," he interrupted. "I'm proposing a marriage of convenience. You need security and a name for your child." "I need a wife and family to satisfy the terms of my father's will, which requires me to be married with a child by my 35th birthday to retain full ownership of the ranch." "But the child isn't yours," Vivian said, struggling to process his offer. "No one beyond this ranch needs to know that." Zachary's expression softened slightly. "We could claim we married quickly and quietly a few months ago. People will talk, but they'll forget soon enough." Vivian sank into a chair, light-headed from shock. "You would claim another man's child as your own. Why?" "Because it's the decent thing to do," Zachary said simply. "And because in the 4 months you've been here, I've come to respect you, Miss Ross. You work hard, you're kind to my men, and you've brought life back into this house. I believe we could build a good partnership." "Not love." The question slipped out before Vivian could stop it. A shadow crossed Zachary's face. "I believe mutual respect makes for a more stable foundation than fleeting emotions." The words stung more than they should have, reminding Vivian painfully of how her heart had led her astray with Thomas. "I don't expect an answer tonight," Zachary continued. "Take time to consider. But know that, regardless of your decision, you have a place here until after the baby comes, at minimum." Vivian nodded, unable to form a coherent response to his unexpected proposal. As she lay awake that night, her hands resting on the growing life within her, she weighed her limited options. Marriage to Zachary would provide security, respectability, and a father for her child. But could she bind herself to a man who saw their union as merely practical? Could she live with knowing she wasn't truly wanted but merely useful? By morning, Vivian had reached her decision. She found Zachary at breakfast, earlier than the ranch hands would arrive, and sat across from him at the kitchen table. "If I accept your proposal," she began without preamble, "I need to know exactly what you expect from this arrangement." Zachary set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "I would expect fidelity, honesty, and partnership in maintaining this ranch and raising any children, including the one you carry. In return, you and your child would have my name, my protection, and a share in everything I own." "And the more intimate aspects of marriage?" Vivian asked, her cheeks flushing despite her determination to be practical. Zachary's expression remained steady, though a slight color touched his neck above his collar. "That would be at your discretion, Miss Ross. I won't demand what isn't freely given." The respect inherent in his answer bolstered Vivian's courage. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Ingram, though I must ask, are you certain you won't regret claiming another man's child as your own?" Zachary leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "Any man who abandons his responsibilities doesn't deserve to be called a father. Blood doesn't make family, Miss Ross. Commitment does." The quiet conviction in his voice awakened something in Vivian's heart, not love, perhaps, but a warmth that felt dangerously close to hope. "Then I suppose we should discuss when this wedding will take place," she said. "The sooner the better," Zachary replied. "I'll ride into town today to speak with the Reverend." 3 days later, Vivian found herself standing beside Zachary in Reverend Porter's small study, exchanging vows that would bind their lives together. She wore her best dress, a pale blue that did its best to disguise her condition, and clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers that Ernest's wife had gathered that morning. The ceremony was brief, attended only by Ernest and his wife as witnesses. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary surprised Vivian by gently lifting her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that felt more genuine than she'd expected. "Mrs. Ingram," he said quietly as they stepped out into the sunlight, her new name both strange and significant on his tongue. The town buzzed with the news of Zachary Ingram's sudden marriage, and while Vivian detected whispers and speculative glances as they walked to the general store afterward, Zachary's protective presence beside her made them easier to bear. That evening, after a celebratory dinner prepared by Mrs. Miller, Zachary escorted Vivian to the master bedroom, now their shared room, though he had made good on his promise by having a second bed installed. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," he said, standing awkwardly by the door as Vivian took in the spacious room with its large windows and handsome furniture. "It's lovely," she replied, equally uncertain of how to navigate this new intimacy. "I'll give you privacy to change," Zachary said, turning to leave. "I need to check on a new calf in the barn anyway." When he returned an hour later, Vivian was already in her bed, the covers pulled to her chin despite her modest nightgown. Zachary nodded a good night and disappeared behind a folding screen to change into his own nightclothes before settling into the second bed across the room. "Good night, Mrs. Ingram," he said softly as he extinguished the lamp. "Good night." "Zachary," Vivian replied, using his given name for the first time. In the darkness, she could have sworn she heard a quiet intake of breath at the sound of his name on her lips. The weeks that followed brought a gradual adjustment to their unusual arrangement. They developed a rhythm sharing meals, discussing ranch matters, even reading together in the evenings that felt increasingly natural. Zachary proved to be considerate of Vivian's condition, ensuring she didn't overtax herself and bringing in a young woman from town to help with the heavier housework. As Vivian's pregnancy progressed, Zachary's attentiveness only increased. He brought back a rocking chair from a trip to Santa Fe, installing it on the porch where Vivian could sit in the cool evenings. When she mentioned difficulty sleeping due to discomfort, he fashioned extra pillows to support her growing belly. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the desert landscape in fiery hues, Vivian felt the baby kick stronger than ever before. "Oh," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her stomach. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, instantly alert. "Yes, it's just," Vivian smiled, taking his hand before she could reconsider the impulse. "Here, feel." She placed his calloused palm against the swell of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened, and Vivian worried she'd overstepped an unspoken boundary. Then came a solid thump against his hand, and Zachary's eyes widened in wonder. "That's quite a kick," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "He or she has been particularly active lately," Vivian said, "especially in the evenings." Zachary didn't remove his hand, and Vivian didn't ask him to. They sat in companionable silence as the baby continued its acrobatics, and something shifted between them, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Have you thought about names?" Zachary asked after a while. The question caught Vivian off guard. "I hadn't gotten that far," she admitted. "I've been so focused on getting through each day." Zachary nodded thoughtfully. "My father was named William, my mother was Elizabeth, both good, strong names." "They are," Vivian agreed, touched by the implicit suggestion that her child might carry the name of Zachary's parents, a true acceptance into his family line. That night, for the first time, Zachary sat on the edge of Vivian's bed before retiring to his own and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sleep well, Vivian," he murmured, and the sound of her given name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. The following months brought increasing closeness as Vivian's due date approached. Zachary had taken to reading aloud in the evenings, mostly from books about ranching or history, but occasionally poetry that revealed a softer side Vivian suspected few had ever glimpsed. Their sleeping arrangement remained separate, but increasingly felt like a formality rather than a necessity. More than once, Vivian had awakened in the night to find Zachary watching over her from his bed, concern evident in his features. And increasingly, she found herself watching him too, the strong lines of his face relaxed in sleep, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. It was during one such night, as Vivian struggled to find a comfortable position for her now enormous belly, that the first pains began sharp twinges that gradually increased in intensity until she could no longer contain a gasp of discomfort. Zachary was instantly awake. "Vivian, what is it?" "I think," she managed between clenched teeth, "the baby is coming." What followed was a flurry of activity as Zachary roused the house, sending a ranch hand galloping toward town to fetch the midwife while Mrs. Miller came to assist with the initial preparations. Zachary himself seemed torn between panic and determination, hovering near Vivian until Mrs. Miller firmly shooed him from the room. "This ain't a place for men, Mr. Ingram. You wait outside like all fathers do." The labor was long and difficult. Through waves of pain, unlike anything she'd experienced, Vivian found herself calling for Zachary more than once. To her surprise, he appeared each time, defying convention to hold her hand and wipe her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement until the midwife arrived and once again banished him from the room. When the midwife finally allowed him back in, dawn was breaking over the horizon, casting golden light through the bedroom windows. Vivian lay exhausted against the pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Zachary," she whispered as he approached cautiously, "come meet your daughter." His expression as he gazed down at the tiny, red-faced infant was one Vivian would never forget, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and fierce protectiveness that brought tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed, "just like her mother." When Vivian offered the baby to him, Zachary hesitated. "I've never held one so small." "Support her head," the midwife instructed gruffly. "She won't break." With infinite care, Zachary took the newborn in his arms, cradling her against his broad chest. The baby squirmed, then settled, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to wrap around his finger with surprising strength. "Elizabeth," Vivian said softly, "after your mother." "If that's still agreeable to you." Zachary nodded, unable to speak past the emotion evident in his eyes. When he finally looked up at Vivian, the depth of feeling in his gaze took her breath away. "Thank you," he said simply, and Vivian understood he meant for far more than just the name. In the weeks that followed Elizabeth's birth, Zachary proved himself a devoted father, willingly taking his turn walking the floor with the fretful infant during long nights and proudly showing her off to visitors. The ranch hands, initially awkward around the tiny newcomer, soon became protective uncles, bringing small handmade toys and volunteering to watch the baby when Vivian needed rest. One evening, as Vivian nursed Elizabeth in the rocking chair while Zachary worked at his desk nearby, a knock at the door announced an unexpected visitor. Ernest entered, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "Boss, there's someone here asking for Mrs. Ingram. Says his name is Thomas Blackwell." The name fell like a stone in the quiet room. Vivian clutched Elizabeth closer while Zachary rose slowly to his feet, his expression darkening. "What does he want?" Zachary asked, his voice dangerously calm. Ernest shifted uncomfortably. "Says he wants to talk to Mrs. Ingram about his child." Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. "I don't want to see him." Zachary nodded, his jaw set. "Tell him Mrs. Ingram is unavailable, Ernie, and that any matters concerning my daughter can be directed to me." Ernest hesitated. "He's insisting, boss. Says he has rights." "Rights?" Zachary's voice was low but carried an edge that made even Ernest take a step back. "Tell him to wait on the porch. I'll be out directly." After Ernest left, Zachary turned to Vivian, his expression softening. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." "What does he want after all this time?" Vivian whispered, fear and anger warring within her. "He made his choice." Zachary knelt beside the rocking chair, his hand gentle on her arm. "I'll send him away. But if you want to hear what he has to say, I'll be right beside you." Vivian looked down at Elizabeth, now sleeping peacefully at her breast. The child had Zachary's surname, his protection, his love. Thomas had forfeited any claim to her the day he'd boarded that stagecoach. "I'll speak to him," Vivian decided, her voice stronger than she felt. "But not alone." With Elizabeth settled in her cradle, Vivian and Zachary went to the porch together, his hand a reassuring presence at the small of her back. Thomas stood at the bottom of the steps, his city clothes and clean-shaven face a stark contrast to the rugged surroundings. He looked prosperous but tired, his expression tightening when he saw Zachary. "Vivian," he began, ignoring Zachary entirely. "You're looking well. It's Mrs. Ingram now," Zachary corrected before Vivian could respond. "State your business, Blackwell." Thomas's mouth twisted with displeasure. "I came to speak with Vivian privately about our child." "Our child," Vivian echoed incredulously. "You made it abundantly clear you wanted nothing to do with this baby when you left me standing in the dust." "I was hasty," Thomas admitted, having the grace to look somewhat ashamed. "The banking position fell through, and I've had time to reconsider my responsibilities. I'm prepared to do right by you and the child now that it's convenient for you." Zachary's voice was cold. "That's not how fatherhood works, Blackwell." Thomas finally acknowledged Zachary with a dismissive glance. "This doesn't concern you, Ingram. This is between Vivian and me." "My wife and daughter are very much my concern," Zachary replied evenly. "And you're trespassing on my property." Vivian laid a restraining hand on Zachary's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "The baby is a girl, Thomas. Her name is Elizabeth Ingram. She has a father who was there when she took her first breath, who walks the floor with her at night, who loves her without condition or convenience." Thomas's expression hardened. "So that's it. You've replaced me so easily." "There was nothing to replace," Vivian said quietly. "You never wanted this baby. You made that perfectly clear." "People change their minds," Thomas insisted, taking a step forward. "I have rights, you have nothing," Zachary interrupted, moving slightly in front of Vivian. "The law recognizes me as Elizabeth's father. Her birth certificate bears my name, and more importantly, I'm the one who's here day and night helping to raise her." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You can't just claim another man's child," she said. "He never wanted this baby." Zachary cut in, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Then I'll want you both enough." The declaration hung in the air between them, resonating with a truth Vivian hadn't fully realized until that moment. Zachary hadn't merely been fulfilling an obligation or upholding a bargain. Somewhere along the way, his practical arrangement had transformed into something far deeper. Thomas looked between them, whatever arguments he'd prepared dying on his lips as he registered the protective stance of Zachary's body and the way Vivian naturally leaned toward him. "I see," he finally said, his shoulders slumping slightly. "It appears I truly am too late." "You are," Vivian confirmed gently. "Please don't come back, Thomas. We've made our peace with the past." After a long moment, Thomas nodded stiffly. "I wish you well, then." He turned to go, then paused. "She's healthy, the baby." "She's perfect," Vivian answered. "Strong and beautiful." Something like regret flickered across Thomas's face before he nodded once more and walked to his waiting horse. They watched in silence as he rode away, the dust settling in his wake just as it had when he'd first abandoned her. When he was out of sight, Vivian turned to Zachary, finding him already looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "What you said about wanting us both enough." Zachary's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "I meant every word. I think I've wanted you since the day you started bringing this house back to life. And Elizabeth," his voice caught. "She may not have my blood, but she has my heart completely." "Zachary," Vivian breathed, covering his hand with her own. "I never expected this when I agreed to your proposal. I thought we would have a partnership, an arrangement of mutual benefit. I never thought that we might find love instead," he finished for her, a smile warming his normally serious features. "Neither did I. I'd convinced myself that practical considerations were safer than matters of the heart." "And now?" Vivian asked, barely daring to hope. "Now I know better," Zachary said, drawing her closer. "I love you, Vivian Ingram, not for what you do for this ranch or because of any arrangement, but for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your heart." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "I love you too. I think perhaps I have for longer than I realized." When his lips met hers, it was their first true kiss, not the chaste peck of their wedding ceremony, but a kiss born of genuine feeling. deepening as Vivian's arms wound around his neck and his hands spread across her back, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. A small cry from inside the house broke them apart, both smiling as Elizabeth made her needs known. "Our daughter calls," Zachary said, the word carrying a weight of belonging that filled Vivian's heart to overflowing. As they went inside together to tend to Elizabeth, Vivian reflected on the strange path that had led her here from abandonment and despair to finding a love stronger and truer than she could have imagined. Zachary might not have been the father of her child by blood, but in all the ways that truly mattered, he was everything a father should be. Life at the Ingram Ranch settled into a new rhythm, as Elizabeth grew from a newborn to an inquisitive toddler with Zachary's determined spirit and Vivian's gentle eyes. The separate beds in the master bedroom had long since been replaced by a single larger one, their marriage now complete in every sense. Zachary never missed an opportunity to show Vivian how deeply he treasured her, and she blossomed under his unwavering devotion. On Elizabeth's second birthday, as they watched her toddle around the yard clutching the wooden horse Zachary had carved for her, Vivian noticed her husband watching their daughter with an unusually thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. Zachary squeezed her fingers gently. "I was just thinking that she might enjoy having a brother or sister someday." Vivian smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I believe that could be arranged, perhaps sooner than you think." Zachary's head turned sharply to look at her, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Vivian, are you saying?" She nodded, her free hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. This one is truly yours by blood, though I know it makes no difference in your heart." Zachary gathered her into his arms, his joy evident in every line of his body. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory, again." As Elizabeth ran to join their embrace, Vivian reflected on how the greatest tragedy of her life had led her to its greatest blessing. Thomas had never wanted their baby, but Zachary had wanted them both enough to build a family bound by choice rather than obligation, a family now growing with the new life they'd created together. "I love you," she whispered against his neck. "Both enough and more than enough." "And I you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever and always." 6 months later, when William Ernest Ingram entered the world with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair like his father's, the family circle widened once more. Elizabeth, now old enough to understand she was a big sister, peered cautiously at the swaddled infant in her mother's arms. "Baby?" she asked, pointing a small finger. "Yes, sweetheart," Vivian answered. "This is your brother, William." Zachary lifted Elizabeth so she could see better. "You'll have to help us teach him all sorts of things, just like we taught you." Elizabeth nodded solemnly, already taking her new responsibility seriously. "I help." As Zachary settled beside Vivian on the bed, his arm around her shoulders and Elizabeth on his lap, the four of them formed a tableau of the family none of them had expected to find, but one that felt more right than any of them could have imagined. Outside, the New Mexico sun bathed the ranch in golden light, the promise of spring evident in the green shoots pushing through the garden soil and the new calves dotting the pastures. Inside, the promise of love fulfilled warmed the hearts of a family built not on convention or obligation, but on choice, commitment, and a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "This is what happiness feels like," Vivian thought as she watched Zachary gently guide Elizabeth's small hand to her brother's cheek. This was the family she'd dreamed of, but never thought she'd have a husband who cherished her, children who would grow up knowing they were wanted and loved. A home filled with warmth and laughter. All because, when faced with abandonment and despair, she'd found the courage to accept an unusual proposal. And because a solitary rancher had looked beyond convention to offer protection to a woman in need, only to discover that in saving her, he had also saved himself from a lifetime of loneliness. As the years passed, the Ingram family continued to grow and thrive. Elizabeth, now a spirited young girl with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, showed a natural affinity for horses that delighted Zachary. William, sturdy and thoughtful, preferred to follow Ernest around the ranch, solemnly observing the daily operations with an attention to detail that suggested he might one day take over management of the property. They were joined by a third child, a daughter named Grace, when Elizabeth was 7 and William 5. And though the ranch hands joked that Zachary was building his own cattle drive crew, the truth was simpler. The Ingrams had discovered in each other a love so abundant it naturally expanded to embrace more children, more joy, more life. Copper Creek grew from a small settlement to a proper town, and the Ingram Ranch prospered under Zachary and Vivian's joint stewardship. They established a reputation for fair dealings and generosity, helping newcomers get established and weathering hard times alongside their neighbors. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Vivian with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children, with room for one more that would be filled when their 4th child arrived in the spring. "To remind you," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "that from the greatest uncertainties can come the greatest blessings." Vivian touched the locket, then reached up to trace the lines that years of sun and laughter had etched around Zachary's eyes. "I never imagined that day by the stagecoach that my life was just beginning, not ending." "Neither of us knew what we were starting," Zachary agreed, pulling her close, "but I wouldn't change a single step of the journey." As twilight deepened over the land they'd nurtured together, Vivian thought about the words that had changed their lives, a desperate observation and a determined promise. She'd said, "He never wanted this baby." And Zachary had whispered, "Then I'll want you both enough." Enough had become everything, and a marriage of convenience had become the greatest love story either of them could have imagined, not because fate had decreed it, but because they had chosen, day after day, to build something beautiful from what began as necessity. And in that choice, they had found not just contentment, but a joy deeper and more enduring than either had dared to hope for, a joy that would continue to sustain them through all the seasons of their lives together.